Tēnā koutou, no mai, haere mai. Welcome to Newsroom, brought to you by Insurance Brokers Alliance. This is where we give you our opinions on what's in the news, what's going on politically, anywhere in the world really, from the perspective of our panel, which tonight consists of Invercargill Mayor Tim Shadbolt. Welcome, I say back to the panel, Tim, because it's been a while now, but we've had you on Newsroom before, so it's lovely to have you back. Broadcaster Tom Conroy.
Well,
Thank you, Tom, and journalist Hunter Andrews.
Thanks, Bill.
All here to tell you what they think about really a summary of what's happened in this country mainly, but some overseas stuff for the year. Well, we'll start with politics. Political leaders. Tim, how do you think that John Key how's he done this year? Is it looking positive? Is he sliding downhill, gaining confidence, or what?
Well, I think all prime ministers get onto a sort of a roller coaster ride, and I would say this wouldn't have been his happiest year in terms of political outcomes. I think the Green manoeuvre to place emphasis on selling assets, and it's just never in New Zealand's history really been a popular cause. And I think that would count against him. His charm is still there, but the issues are just always going to be complex and difficult, and I guess if he can pull a rabbit out of the hat like the balance of payments, for example, of course the roller coaster ride could go up again. So in politics it's all about timing.
He has a remarkable talent for pulling rabbits out of hats, doesn't he?
Yes, and he has a sort of a charm. He's not what you call an orator. He's not going to enthrall into a hall of 500 people and inspire them to rush out into the streets and vote for National, but he's very good at conversational discussion and looks very comfortable in most situations, and I think he hasn't done too bad considering where he's at in terms of the political survivability of prime ministers in this country.
Has David Cunliffe provided any opposition?
Well, just on John Key, I think the burden of managing a difficult coalition with some partners that he may have regret having tea with and various other things have weighed heavily, and for relatively small issues have distracted him from other more important matters, I think. And I think he's got to be a little more I don't know, opinionated, if you like. This question of when you're asked, what did you think of the Springbok tour? What is your position? To say you can't remember when you were 19, I mean, no one in the world's going to believe that. Yeah. Have an opinion. I don't care if it's not, what mine is.
Popular. But
I think there's a little bit of credibility when you start wavering on issues like that. And then you come out fighting on this referenda, which has gone against him, of course, because he's had this, I've had a mandate because I got elected, therefore I can sell the assets, and then find out that you can't. If you're playing that, now he finds that that's not the case, and he would have known, like the rest of us, it would have come up. You can be magnanimous in defeat and say, okay, well, maybe there's some rethinking to be done there, but it's just, I'll just totally disregard it. So I'm going to ignore the 67% of people that said they didn't want it. That's not playing, that's not winning them over. That's disrespecting my opinion that I've been able to express through the referendum. So, I think on those matters, I'm losing a little bit of credibility for myself. I think still a good operator, but I think you could, if you want to win people over, you've got to be a little bit careful about how you sell your message. And on those two occasions, I thought it was a little bit embarrassing.
Yeah. And I think, saying being able to be magnanimous in defeat actually can turn into a big positive sometimes, Hunter. You're saying so. Commenting on what Tom said there before, that I mean, if you can say that, maybe, okay, we didn't get it right.
Conciliatory is the word I would use. You can be a little bit more conciliatory is a better word.
I found it quite arrogant. It's interesting as a political observer, as we all are, watching him, and he's performed really well for 5 years, and it's been pretty good, and he's dealt with some pretty heavy issues, and that sell of the asset sales was never going to be easy, and I bet he had a lot of pressure from senior front benches and that sort of thing, saying, look, are you really keen on this, John? For the sake of making our stock exchange look really exciting, do we really want to put ourselves through this? And then to have, really what you had in Phil Goff at the last election was someone who really wasn't seen as a popular leader. It was unlikely with one term away from office, and Labor have never done that, come back after one term away. They've never done it. History of the National Party is they get 9 years, 6 to 9 years. So people didn't vote. 400,000 plus didn't vote that normally would have voted left of centre or around there. So I think that his saying it was an endorsement or a mandate to sell those assets is quite a wee way.
Well, a lot
from
of
the
people
truth.
just don't believe him, do they?
And if they do attempt to sell Genesis Energy in the new year, it'll be interesting to watch those polls, because National Labour have just lifted themselves to 40%, highest since 2007.
Do you think he sees it as a sign of weakness if he backs off the asset
Maybe.
sales,
Well,
and therefore I'm going to look weak and
Well,
I
he
can't
comes
be
from an industry where you can't afford to lose, and if you lose
Yeah.
as a merchant banker or corporate banker, then you lose millions of dollars and you lose your job and that sort of thing. So maybe there's a bit of that mentality coming out that I'll fight this corner.
There's always a middle ground, though. You don't have to be. It doesn't have to be sell everything or sell nothing. There are ways of finding, say, okay, we'll sell a couple of things, see how it goes, and then review it. But there's none of that. There's just I don't ignore that. That was just a publicity thing for Labor, or whatever, or Greens, and we're going to go down this path.
Let's just have a wee break.
Just down a minute.
If he fronted up and said, "Let's just have a wee break, and we'll wait till the markets improve," and that's
He couldn't use the term cup of tea though. Got many bad
It's
connotations.
removed from the political vocabulary every leader for the history of New Zealand.
David Longie's cup of tea didn't work too well. Well, the asset sales, I mean, the Treasury has just come out too and said, well, listen, these things are costing more now than we thought they were going to. Instead of,
Surprise,
49 million, they're now looking at, they've got less for them. And so the loss, if you could put it in those terms, is 108 million a year now. So they've been able to pay back 4.2 billion, or will be able to, in loan repayments, and therefore they're saving on interest, but they're losing the divvies off the shares and stuff like that. Well, they thought the difference there might be 49 million, but now Treasury's saying 108 million. So it's going downhill rapidly, because they were originally earning $327 million a year off those assets. So it will be interesting to see if they do sell Genesis.
The picture is, let's get our stock exchange looking exciting. The previous largest float was Telecom in the early 90s. That's how long it's been between drinks as far as big assets registering on our stock exchange. And that was the primary reason, was to make us look like international players.
Epsom and Tamaki were the only two electorates in that referendum that voted in favour of asset sales. And one can imagine why Epsom did. I mean, that's where they make their money. Sorry, friends.
Only the impoverished
Sound buying
few,
and selling
are they?
shares. Impoverished few,
Yeah, no.
And even John Key's own electorate voted 52% to 48% against the asset sales. What's his Helensville? So very interesting.
Well, it was a sobering time, and I mean, here in Invercargill you had situations where sheep were getting their throats cut in the main street. It was a traumatic time for New Zealand, that Roger Douglas era, where they just went hell for leather, and of course followed by Ruth Richardson. And I don't think New Zealanders want to go through that
just
again.
coming up for a year, aren't we? It's taken almost 30 years to recover. Well, certainly from wage and price freezes in the early 80s.
Just talking about, you asked about David Cummins.
I was coming back to that.
We were having a discussion yesterday, and I was keen to suggest that I think they missed a trick by not picking Shane Jones. Because I thought he would be a good choice to appeal to the populace, the rough diamond, the man with some flaws, and someone completely different from John Key. You had someone to say, look, I'm not perfect, I've done these silly things, I'm not going to get anything right, but I actually care about you people, which is a sort of isn't that a Labour philosophy? I think it might be.
I believe so, Tom.
Whereas Gunlum's just another sort of slightly different from Key.
Yes.
There's not enough contrast for me. He's a soundbite man. He's a bit smarmy for me, and I don't think he's not someone a lovable sort of politician. If you can use that
not all
word.
his own party
Contradiction
loved him.
terms, actually.
Let's
But
face it.
there we go.
Well,
So I thought there was a trick there that was missed.
That's right. They always say that it's who loses the elections, not who wins the next elections, that's critical. And I think that's the case. If the asset sales had been a huge success and mums and dads had flocked to the stock market and the value of those shares had rocketed up, probably people would be patting them on the back. But when it comes to the economy...
It shows even they didn't know. They didn't know. Now, referenda, the last 4 referenda, I think there was been between 81 and 98% of people have supported them, etc. But governments have never taken any notice of them. It seems like if, in rugby terms, if 110% of people voted against something in the referenda, the government say, well, no, 3 years ago you put us in power, and amongst 25 other things you said we could do this, and say we're taking that as your opinion. Do we need to does the legislation need to be abolished?
Well, it was a great tactical move on behalf of the Greens and Labour to focus interest on a government failing, and according to the polls, it has worked. So you know, again, in politics, you don't take prisoners, and if it focused attention and did the job, as far as they were saying, well, now we mightn't have won the battle, but perhaps as a result of this referendum, we will win the war. And people will balance it out. I mean, to be honest with this government, I am a bit soft on them, because when it came to the Tiwai smelter, we could have been in a huge trouble. I have to say, John Key was a very honest negotiator. Every opportunity where we met in public, he would give me an update. He phoned me, as did Bill English. So in terms of really dealing with local interests and trying to work through that situation, they were very good to Invercargill, and I'm afraid to say governments where I thought would be more sympathetic towards myself or Invercargill, I didn't really get that response. So it just depends how many other situations around the country were like that.
In answer to your question about the referendum and how to make it either useful or take it away, if there was some legislation that said if, say, 75% of people vote, 75% turn out for the vote, and 75% vote for one of those two, that there's some obligation to readdress the issue. I don't know how you could word that. Or to have something on it. So when I go to, because I think the low turnout comes from, no matter what I vote for, nobody's going to do anything about it. That's exactly right. But so I think let's have it, but let's make it meaningful. And what's wrong with having which is effectively a mini election within in a period? And if the government actually embraced it, said, okay, we've got this wrong, or we'll readdress it, I'm sure that'll win favour, not put people off. So I think if you tidied it up with some obligation on the behalf of someone, people would be inspired to vote, and then people would be inspired to do something about it, depending on the result. Or nothing, if the vote was insufficient.
And depending on the topics too. I mean, you could set out a referendum tomorrow saying I want to halve GST, and you get enough signatures for a referendum immediately, and then probably get 75% support. So I can understand why that non-binding thing does exist, but there's definitely room to revisit.
You don't have it that you have to do what the thing says, but you have to readdress the issues that are of concern and look like you actually care what people think, which is what democracy is, isn't it? I thought so.
That's right, but I still think there's room, even in the present situation, for actual focusing on issues. And I do the same with my mayor's polls, and I'm organising another one for early next year. You go out to the people, you ask their opinion. All right, I've got no executive authority whatsoever to impose the results of those polls on my councillors. They're not scientific polls in any shape or form, and I never pretend that they are. It is only polling proactive people who are interested or enthusiastic or involved. It's not the average person in the street necessarily that responds to those polls. But just the same, I think, between elections, it can help people just remind them of the issues they're facing.
Well, you can go back to your councillors and say, well, I've done this poll. This is what 1,000 people think. What are you going to do about it?
That's right.
I guess that's, you're saying, as you say, you're not claiming any executive authority and saying we must have to. You can put the responsibility back. And I guess there would be a certain amount of conscience about that. Well, we would hope so. We would certainly hope so. Let's stick with local body politics, Tim. The Herald. Your Herald, Tim.
One of your colleagues, I suppose, in the
Herald has called for the resignation of Auckland Super City Mayor Glenn Brown. It seems to be unprecedented, a front page thing. We know that newspapers are always commenting on what mayors do, what local bodies do, etc. This is a very powerful call. Do you think it's justified under the circumstances?
Well, whether it's justified or not, I can see how and why it's happening. The phone call issue is the latest one that's come out. Hundreds of phone calls to her, and yet when I tried to talk with him over the A to B, he never had time.
No, that's the subject.
He
He just thought the yacht race was hopeless. He had more time for her. She was likely to be more successful.
Don't get top of the yacht race.
All right.
Start me on that one. But anyway, good point, Tim.
I guess if you've got two options, talking to me on the phone or chatting to her, I suppose maybe.
I don't think you can excite him as much.
No, but there'll be a lot of people in my situation who'll think, I tried to contact them over this issue, I never got a response, and now will feel quite bitter
interesting point
about
of view.
how come he had all this time. All right, it may not be illegal, or it may not be even in breach of standing orders or the council code of conduct, but nonetheless people feel upset about that kind of use of facilities, and everyone says no, it's not a moral issue, but it sort of is really, and it's getting into a very grey area when you accept upgrades. Now I've had upgrades and it's just goodwill, you know. I say, well, that's very kind of you, and he says, well, it's good publicity having you here, Mr. Mayor, and you deserve it, you know, and you're a regular customer and we want to keep your custom. Now, technically, I may be in breach of something, but luckily I'm only with Usher when I have my upgrade, so there isn't quite so much excitement generated by that situation. But it is common in business, and I think there was a very good online joke today even about poor old Len Brown saying, I'm in the dog box now, and then the next shot is him saying, but I wonder if I'll get an upgrade. I think it might be the comedy that'll be damaging him more than the legislation. And
I think the smugness annoys people, the fact that he's like, I've got away with it, I'm going to keep doing my job, and avoiding the questions about is there any more to come when there's a continual stream of things, and he knew that was the case, and he's just trying to ride it out, brazen it out. That first interview he did on TV after his 2-week self-imposed sabbatical out of the way, and then just be so defiant when asked, is there anything else? Oh, I'm sorting it out with my wife, But you're in a public office and there's a public nature to it, and you don't seem to be that busy for the mayor of a super city because you have all the spare time to be doing these other things. There's a question mark. He's supposed to be running the biggest city in New Zealand,
exactly,
and he's spending a lot of his working time entertaining himself in an entertainment venue. So there's all those questions. I think sometimes you got to say, look, I've been caught. I don't know whether it's legal or not. And maybe the gracious thing to do is say, look, okay, I'll move aside. But he just seems to be absolutely adamant. He's going to dig his heels in and write it out.
Can the council actually, they can't actually get rid of him, can they? The
No,
council.
the code of conduct is actually being hit with a wet bus ticket, the old proverbial. There is no authority that councils have. He's independently elected, and that's the end of the story. But it's really all the other issues coming out, and even his own deputy, who's Penny Hoss, who I've had a lot of debates with and involved in different issues with, seems to be backing away from him at this stage. So it's not looking good.
Do you think he'll survive, Hunter?
I think he'll ride it out. He'll at least give it over the Christmas period and probably 3 or 4 months into next year, and if he can bury it in that time, and a few housing issues and that sort of thing I know they're not mowing their lawns properly and that sort of thing. I mean, those sorts of things may override slowly, issue by issue, slowly surmount the mountain that is, unless there's more released, more information.
I think where he thought he could ride it out was when all that Luigi or whatever it was came out, and then the other mayor doing a runner and going overseas and not fronting up. And I think there was a degree of sympathy at that stage where they felt that maybe it was a bit of a set-up. And it was a bit, and the characters involved in setting him up didn't look too savoury, and so I think there was a feeling that, right, let's give him another chance. But of course, with all these fresh revelations, when are they going to stop? And in terms of a city's image, I mean, what a mayor is meant to do is represent the progressive and positive sides of a city and project them out, and neither Len or the Mayor of Toronto, for that matter, and even if naughty little Johnny Two Checks had been elected, he would be in trouble now, and more serious trouble, because a breach of the electoral law, you can be sacked.
That's
as a
right.
mayor. So he might have been in worse trouble now.
They might make Nigella Lawson look like a saint. I was just
She's
thinking,
always looked like a saint.
but this is a poor reflection on Auckland over the last couple of campaigns. We've got John Banks in court next year for forgetting where he helicopter rides and electoral fraud, and then the next election we've got these two sides, and both of them seem to be a little unsavoury. So it's not actually a good reflection on our local body politics, which we think is squeaky clean and we don't have a lot of corruption.
Well, it is down
Well,
here.
it's not absolute corruption in sort of Italian style, but it's not, it's a bad start, isn't it?
Politicians are rated fairly low on the scale of people who are trusted anyway.
It's not helping. It's not helping.
It's not helping. Stick with us. We're going to take a break. We'll be back. Welcome back to Newsroom. Tim, our stadium is going to be, when it's reopened, it's going to be the biggest and best indoor facility in New Zealand. Again, it was pretty good the first one we had round, but now we're looking at something bigger and better. But it has taken rather a long time. We'll talk to Tom about that in a minute, but yes.
It certainly has, and there's no denying it. The Christchurch earthquake has had a huge impact on all cities and towns throughout New Zealand, whether it's looking at older heritage buildings or new buildings that are being built, and it just is. I was talking to Alan Dennis the other day, and he said every day something else crops up, and I said, oh, it can't be that bad, Alan. He said, it is, every day. I said, well, what's today's issue? He said, well, we had this stadium, not my one, but another part of the stadium that comes out with the seating, and one person should be able to push it out because there'd be air vacuum created under the floorboards that would lift the stadium
Floats
into the
on
air. It was based on the tongue and groove leaking 0.8% of the air pressure that's pushed up underneath it, and unfortunately the air pressure was 0.9%, which meant the whole thing leaked, and even 20 men pushing the stadium couldn't push it across the courts.
That sounds like it can't be the first place in the world to have put that in. And
yes, well, it just seems to have been one thing after another. The slightest miscalculation, and it can lead to issues like that.
The slightest miscalculation may have been game on March 2012, really.
12, was it then? 12, yeah, right.
I think it was 2012,
It was 12,
yeah.
But Bill, I think what we've got to stop doing, and this is serious advice, is stop telling people it's going to be the biggest, brightest, the world's greatest stadium. Because all you're doing is just setting yourself up for a second fall. And I go around the country all the time, and it's like how's your world-class facility coming on? Because we kept using that expression. I think we've got to quietly open it and quietly prove ourselves all over again. And I've got an exact situation where I've got two international acts coming this year. The first one, Bill Haley and his juniors competition. They're going to be there in March.
Good.
If it's open, okay. But the second one, which we have signed, I can tell people it's Paul Potts, the opera guy who won the British Talent. I can't convince that promoter to go back to the stadium. They want to be at the Civic just for that sound, because they've got to re-win the confidence. And I'm working on it, so we can get more people and things. Well, let's see how it works first. It's too big an act. With a too big a promoter above him that tells the world that it was a disaster, how the message goes out. And it's a very small family, the promotional world. I've already annoyed someone by booking them for the opening in August and their promoter looks after 10 artists and don't believe you anymore. So you've got to mitigate this damage. This isn't just open the doors and we'll be right. This is win people back, prove that it's good, and then in a year's time, here are 10 people, not us yelling about it, 10 international promoters who are saying it's the greatest stadium in the world. So it's not otherwise it's a false boast. Because you only need one bad show. Imagine the first show goes in there and there's something wrong with the acoustics. It'll be 12 months before you get anyone else putting the reputation on. So just tread warily and prove it first, then make the claims, and if better if someone else is doing it for us. By performance.
It does look very good though, doesn't it?
Oh, fantastic.
Have you had a look around down there, Hunter?
I've certainly been around each week. I drive past and have a look at the outside and see the progress, but we have had a camera operator in there, and from what I saw of the footage. It's,
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm not
And
sure
it
which
does.
stand was yours, but
Well,
they all looked good.
They do, and I think where they've knocked out that toilet block and moved the athletic stadium, and SIT have been involved in that process, and the whole vista of that front area suddenly opens up, and the 2 facilities, or now 3 facilities, are going to be joining, and it'll be the centre of sort of sporting excellence. And I know we shouldn't boast about it until it happens, but I think the delays have been so frustrating for so many people beside you, Tom, that we've tended to want to try and build it up again to make people excited about what is going to happen. But you never know. I mean, look at Dunedin with their stadium. The acoustics, I went to their first big show and they just weren't all that good, and there often are teething problems when you open a new stadium. No one can be 100% certain that everything's going to work on time.
That's why you'd modestly step one at a time. The key thing too is those issues often crop up when you try to be a multi-purpose stadium. And that's
right.
with the rugby stadium, there was always a little bit of risk. No one had ever built a stadium like that anywhere in the world. So acoustically, it's going to take a while before it's adjusted to become a music venue. But it's a perfect rugby one to start with. Whereas here, it might be a perfect netball stadium, but you might play the first bit of music and it, acoustically, it might not work, or it may need some adjustment. So you've got to take those steps. And even the stadium the first time, it was really an accident. We actually put the first concert in there with Hayley Wester in it. Yep. And it turned out to be, this actually sound very, very good. And it got better as they got the drapes, and they continued to work really hard at making it better. It got to be a very, very good performance venue. Glenn Campbell and they told us it was a fantastic place to sing and perform. But it was a gradual build-up of facilities, and we got it right. And I think that's the way to approach this. It might be right first time, but let's not tell people it is until we test it. That's it.
Yes.
And let's watch the space about the insurance payouts and that sort of thing that are yet to be fully secured. And there's always lots of rumours going around about the situation with the last building, and I can confirm nothing. Well, I think we're short a few million. Is that,
well, it's under negotiation, so they've put forward an option and we've put forward an option that's being,
that process will be interesting to watch anyway, and I'm hearing things, and no one's attributing blame or anything, but things will unfold next year as to the old building and that sort of thing, and maybe some issues there. Obviously issues there because it fell over.
Right, but despite we do grizzle a wee bit about money, but Invercargill, generally speaking, with our big projects, we keep pretty much on tap with them. I mean, we don't owe too much money on anything, not like some other cities, because we've got very good funding
We don't
sources.
estimate costs particularly well.
No.
The
civic
might have been all we do is we have money on hand to cover the overrun.
Yeah.
But we've had some significant overruns, I think we've had.
Yes, we have, but where the city can claim to be still in an economically very viable situation is that despite these cost overruns on some of the projects, we've still overall are in a very healthy state because our infrastructure was overbuilt thanks to Statistics New Zealand. We built a sewage system for 100,000. The whole city was getting
So we can all now go to the toilet twice as much.
Twice a day instead of one.
And we are doing, that Bluff pipeline project, about 4 million, Queen's Drive 8 million. We're still focusing on the infrastructure of the city. When you look at the stadiums and the events that we run, it's very much a minor sector of our overall economy. We own 2 electricity companies, our forests are booming at the moment, we're in for an airport upgrade, and we're just doing very well.
C-17 Starlift is landing at the airport, so you've proved to be right.
It's again because of the not wanting to fuel up in Christchurch, so it's a gas and go situation, but of course there are landing fees involved in that.
Was that the practice run they had the other day, was it?
That was another practice run just to see what would happen.
Anyway, haven't
they have been, but they've also been looking at what ifs, and that is what if there was an emergency, could they land? So they're doing dummy flights over the airport and then back round. Some people thought there were 2 planes circling, but they're just one plane testing out whether or not we were capable for emergency landings, and of course we are. So in terms of our infrastructure, we we can be very confident about the future of the city.
But just to contest that, no question about the infrastructure cover, but for the man in the street, those events which numerically don't add up, they have a direct impact because they, the school netball tournament that didn't come here impacts the motels and the retailers and all those things at the very base level where money is exchanged.
There has been a cost.
Yeah. So there is that cost, and it's not much of an application to say, oh, by the way, the electricity company is making a lot of money if you haven't got the people renting your hotel rooms. So there's those, whilst in the grand scheme of things, dollars-wise it might not, but direct to the people who are trading on a day-to-day basis, there is an impact.
Yeah. Hunter, what do you think, from the man in the street's point of view, what do they feel or think about what's happening, before I go to Tim on this one, about the A to B yacht race?
A lot of people don't understand it fully, and I guess there's a small section of the population, usually with a lot of money, that love yachting and that sort of thing. I mean, those are the people we're targeting, so people on the street really don't understand it. I'm a former yachtie, and I've had a wee glimpse of that world, and I've sort of been out in the ocean on a yacht a few times, and it's an amazing feeling, and I've read a lot of books by ocean-going sailors about that dream of sailing in the Southern Ocean, and I can see why so many would be attracted. So I'm a bit biased in that way, but generally I haven't had any positive feedback. I'm trying to think, except for people that I know are yachties who immediately see the benefit in that race. As a yachtie, flying.
Did the America's Cup help it, with that kind of thing? Because it became very significant on TV.
Is it all right to talk about the America's Cup?
No, it's not.
Close to the America's Cup. I'm still counselling.
The greatest marketing con that I've ever seen.
For certain words we're not allowed to mention.
Great marketing con. That's the biggest con. There's only one better con act in the year than the America's Cup, and that was the guy that did the signing at the Mandela presentations. The signing. They're the two big con acts of the year, and people were sucked into both.
I'm sucked in by yachting. I always have been, and I'm no one to ask really, because I am going to side with that. I'm even, I agreed with those millions of dollars that went to the America's Cup, and we'll always be at loggerheads about it. I just love that, and when that boat rose out of the water and that was just almost, and that was amazing too. That was almost hundreds of millions of dollars that left our economy.
I was aghast.
I don't know. There's something special about yachting. I see that drive in people, and I would love to see in 10 or 15 years a magnificent race. That in England they're going, well, you're going to the A to B next year. Yeah, those are my plans. We're sailing around the Pacific, and then we're going to pick up a crew in the Northland and sail down. I would love to think that could be happening.
Yeah. What's the status at the moment, Tim?
Well, it's been postponed, so we're going to give it one more shot at this year over the Christmas period, and we've hired a so-called expert in the field who's going to meet up with these yachties, and I guess if that doesn't work, it's likely, because the government was quite strict about its $500,000 in terms of the number of yachts they want set up. I think with the benefit of hindsight, where we made a mistake, and a lot of other people did too, they said, look, where on earth are these yachts going to go? If 30 yachts come sailing into Bluff Harbour, where's the moorings? Where's the space? So we focused a lot on that. Then, of course, with an international event like this, you've got all the OSH regulations, safety regulations. We spent a lot of time and effort on that. Really, we should have focused on the yachties a lot more and said, will you come? We assumed, because they were all doing the Sydney to Hobart yacht race, this would be a very similar event to that. We wouldn't get such large numbers, but we would certainly attract a few. So it was quite devastating when we attracted, none, really. Maybe one.
It's a shortfall. It's a shortfall. Let's call it that.
And Tom takes no pleasure in being right.
No, we did oversell ourselves.
Again.
There's a reason the America's Cup is 4 years apart, because yachties do plan ahead, a long way ahead, those sorts of events. So, maybe the timing wasn't right, and people are thinking about, where am I going to be next season? Will I be in the Pacific next season? Can I arrange a crew for my yacht? Those sorts of things. They're thinking 2 years ahead or 3 years ahead.
So let's wait and see.
Wait and see.
Yeah, good. Now, another local thing, our inner city upgrade. Tom, I know you had some strong opinions about the inner city upgrade. We'll start with you.
I'll get the latest first from Tim before I comment, in case it's gone ahead without me noticing.
Okay.
No, it was a difficult situation because the committee organising it all and building up this master plan finally came to a conclusion right on the cusp of local government elections. And elections are all about the challenges coming into the ring and challenging the status quo over what they're doing. So it was terrible timing in those terms. But where I think it's going to work again in the bigger picture sense is that we are going to see some significant changes in terms of our local infrastructure, in terms of attracting people to the city, and that those initiatives could very well come from the private sector, not just the council. We shouldn't always be dependent on the council or the trusts for everything that happens in Invercargill. And we're going to see the upgrade of our air terminal. I mean, it's been 50 years. It was only 20% of earthquake code that applied to that terminal. We had to do something. We're going to do something spectacular. And again, the private sector, there's a lot of consent processes going on for commercial buildings in the inner centre. So in terms of focusing on the inner city, it certainly did work, but in terms of, again, rallying the mass support of the people, well, I don't think it did work.
Right. So there's no decisions been taken?
No, it's one good thing about local government is we do work very slowly. People who are worried
everyone on the panel. There's no argument.
Where do you think we should go from here, Tom?
No, let Tim finish. What the next step
well,
is?
the next step, I think we've got to go back to the people, and I think we've got to maybe see this project rather than a master plan. If this is all going to happen, we got to go work even at a slower pace than we usually do, and do one popular aspect, or the most popular aspect that we can think of in terms of all those options and different stages we were given, and then do that, and then go back to the people again and say, well, did you like this? Do you think it worked? And then maybe look at the next stage and just do it very slowly and piece by piece, and make sure there's maximum consultation every step of the way.
And I want to be fair, I mean, I think myself and a lot of other people took little notice until it was well developed, and then thought, oh my goodness, this isn't right. So to be fair to those people who worked on it all the way through, they didn't have, I don't think they had a lot of input at the beginning, they had a lot of input at the end. But at least now it's been acknowledged that it's not quite right, and if there's a bit more consultation, and then from now on, the likes of myself will take a little bit more interest in the earlier stages and say, okay, let's talk about this. Rather than, it's easy to point the finger later on when the plan's on the table and you don't like it. So there's got to be a balance there, not being too critical about the operation itself, just the outcome. I just didn't agree with the outcome, that's all.
And, you know, Graham Sycamore, who's the chair of the Inner City Steering Committee, said to us the other day in South Today News that he just thinks that we will have to talk, but let's get started on something. And perhaps that could be just S Street, you know, that middle area of S Street. Let's do something with that. So there's something visible where there's lots of people, so people can see that something's going on, both the business sector and the public in general. Let's just get something done and then move slowly, progress slowly with consultation through the various 12
And
precincts.
I think there's a value in that, in people coming to town, and every time they come to town they see something happen. It's like going to Christchurch, except that's happening at a huge rate of knots. Every time I go there, maybe once a month, you see things have changed, things have been built, things have been pulled down, it's a completely different. But you see so much progress, you think this is vibrant. This is, they're lifting their game, and that's what I think would be nice. Instead of doing a quick upgrade and then nothing for 10 years, every time someone visits town, oh, that wasn't there before, and that's a nice touch, and I think that has a better effect too. So slowly but surely.
So the one thing that everybody agrees on really throughout the city is we need to do something. You know, everybody agrees to change.
Don't agree on what?
Nobody's saying nobody's saying leave
how
it alone.
much.
Or who's going to pay? Right? We all sort those out.
I think another big issue is the museum, of course, which is very much out of the headlines, out of. We've had councillors and delegations go and look at what other museums have done and that sort of thing. And I think, I could be wrong, but as a result of the last meeting, that the building is above the 33%.
Okay.
That's what I understand, but we can't. Councillor Ludlow won't release the actual figure, so I'm assuming it's pretty close to 33% with the museum as it is now, earthquake proofing. And we know how quickly the council moved when the Bluff Service Centre was found to be under code. It's got everyone's out of there now, under 33%. So I'm thinking the museum may be quite close to that. And I think it's about 20 years since the museum was turned into a pyramid. I could be wrong there, but it'll be interesting to see how that develops anyway, because we're talking 20 plus million there as well.
Right.
So
it's quite a financial commitment.
And that is the elephant in the room on all projects. It's the coding.
Yes.
Where will it fit? Engineers often don't agree with each other as to how code compliant these buildings are. And when you get something like the museum, where you go back in time to a very early structure of no reinforcing and brick layer, and then new specifications sitting on top of that, there are huge variables within that museum as to where the coding.
So you're saying some parts are better than others?
Yeah, well, that's built over the old museum. As I understand that it's an old brick museum. I think it was 40s or 30s.
Well, see, a lot of people wouldn't realise that.
New cap on it. It's a very modern hat.
So it looks like we built a new one 20 years ago, but really we just put
everything could fall down on the inside and should look great from the outside.
I wouldn't like to say that. But it is interesting that figure hasn't been released as to exactly what the earthquake status is for that building.
Then, of course, the government has allowed variables within that code. So if you get a country church that's only used twice a year, what are the odds of that being used by the public for that 1 hour that they're there, and you know, as opposed to a hostel, a student hostel, which may have hundreds of people in it.
All the time. Well, those churches won't insure, will they? That's it, because the insurance companies will be driving that. The engineers really to get building owners to get engineers in is what insurance companies are going to be saying, aren't they? We want to know what the status is, how occupied you are. We're seeing the ASB moving from S Street as we speak, moving from S Street to the corner of Don Street, the old ANZ site, because they're concerned. Their code says we don't want our staff working in a building below this certain percent. Happens, I think the building next to it is lower, so they're out of there, and we're going to see more and more of that. And it's not good for our inner city, because we've got a lot of buildings like that, and those government agencies as well as banks and that sort of thing will have codes and standards now post Christchurch that we will have to meet.
Nelson disclosed the Trafalgar Centre overnight.
That's significant.
That's it. Big event. That's it. You can't be in there anymore.
Well, they've had earthquakes nearby.
Yeah, that's right, and that's prompted them to check. But I think they've been checking since Christchurch, and then they decided that it's just not a safe building anymore. Suddenly you've got a huge infrastructure there that's of no use, and millions of dollars either to repair or knock down or
we finally come to the reality.
To overuse that term.
Exactly. We finally come to the reality that Aotearoa is here because of the intersection of two continental plates, which just happened to grind into each other. On that thought, scientific, we'll take a break. Stay with us. We'll be back. Welcome back to Newsroom. Now, in Southland, we're a dairying province now. I mean, we've seen the growth of dairy farms. Sheep farms have been moved out, dairy farms are moving in, and we've seen Fonterra grow from a relatively small company. It's a farmers cooperative, of course, into something extremely large. And there has been now a statement I see in the news that the Treasury has warned that there is a significant risk with farmers borrowing more against their farms. That if something happened, there could be a threat to national financial stability. I don't know whether it's in light of this or not, but Fonterra have kept the milk fat price, or the price, at $8.30 a kilogram rather than $9. So the farmer will only be getting $8.30 for his milk at the gate. Perhaps that's going to help. But Hunter, you did say in the break, we're talking about this, that in actual fact from all those farm returns, how much are we...
Well, I think at the end of the day, because most of them, of course, most of our banking is owned by Australians, so most of our money goes over there. So at the end of the day, about a fifth, I believe, is reinvested within New Zealand itself. The rest is profits to Australian banks.
So you're saying that from the dairy money we're getting, a lot, because of the high rate of debt against the farms, the interest the farmers are paying is going to Australian banks. Which
may improve. I'm not saying it won't improve with time, but it's certainly, for me, I bank with Kiwi Bank, so my money stays here, but a lot of people don't. And we have to acknowledge that our banks have all been sold to Australian interests, and I guess that's significant. But also, overnight, dairy money prices went up for milk solids again overnight. So the world is demanding our protein. A very interesting story I read yesterday about how Anchor now in Britain is not the Anchor milk, Anchor butter that we used to send. So obviously we're sending that somewhere else. They're now getting British butter, and fans are going, I'm not buying it. It's not the old taste. It's not that New Zealand taste that I've been brought up with for 40 years. So there is a demand. We've obviously got superior flavoured dairy products and that sort of thing. So I can't see the throttle coming off the demand. And I mean, that's that fine balance between the environment, cash flow within the economy, and the affluence of dairy farmers. There's just so much at play here. But the environment, it seemingly is the key. Freshwater policy is key with Environment Southland. And that's going to be huge in the next 10 years.
The rundown in the media, Tom, from the crisis, the health scare crisis we had earlier in the year, how have we recovered? Was it handled well by the media at the time, and how have we recovered from it?
With regard to Fonterra, you mean?
Yes, with regard to
I think they've recovered from that remarkably well.
Yeah.
It was big news, and especially later when they found out there was actually no real issue, and that got good publicity. And I think they worked really hard to fix it. They only get one chance at that. If it happens again, there'll be no second crack. So I think they did everything I think you could humanly do to repair the damage, and it looks like they have. That's my
Although
opinion.
there's still litigation outstanding, of course, so that hasn't been tidied up yet.
I'm thinking in the public eye, and public credibility.
Yeah.
And in terms of feedback, like Tim, you get a lot from overseas and sort of being in that whole receiving, what people think about the province and stuff like that. Do you feel it's sort of faded into the background, or is it still there?
I think dairy farming is still seen as really positive for the South by most people. It's seen as white gold. They're impressed, and all right, Hunter's right, some dairy farmers do overcapitalise, and we saw it with the Crayfer farms, and you think, how is it possible that one farmer from a very modest background could suddenly own 30 farms all over New Zealand? And all right, it's all owed to Australian banks, but you're always going to get in a free market situation where entrepreneurs are encouraged. Some people will overstep the mark, but from a provincial point of view, in terms of the engineering workshops, in terms of the change to the environment now, farmers are taking a lot more responsibility, and admittedly they're under a lot of pressure to do so from local government. But I think we're getting through that dirty dairy stage. Then there's biological warfare with the dung beetles I've spoken about before. So we're looking at innovative ways of turning waste into perhaps energy or different gases. There are all sorts of initiatives being taken. So I see the situation as environmentally anyway improving.
Good. Yeah. Now, we want to talk a little bit about Nelson Mandela.
Yes,
Tom's got something to say.
I'm just astounded about the, I'm not disputing his place in history for South Africa and the changing and the terrible life he went through in order to achieve those changes. But I am surprised about the outpourings of grief and support, if you like, in all corners of the world and in New Zealand. I know there's a slight connection there, and it's not much more than that for me. But it just, you think all the world leaders have gone before. There's lots of people who have achieved a lot in the world that we've clasped this one and really embraced it so closely. It just surprises me a little bit. I think it was Winston Churchill was the last world leader that we acknowledged in some sort of memorial form in New Zealand. Now, there have been a lot of things happen between Winston Churchill and Nelson Mandela. So what are the rules on that? Where do we decide that this person decides to be...
The media did, didn't they?
Well,
he is the first huge leader to have died in a time of modern media where we were just absolutely bombarded with it. And what was it, 65 with Churchill, there probably would have been a scratchy television on news, or so. Did we have television news in 1965?
Yeah, we did.
Well, it wouldn't have been great coverage. I mean, we've watched Mandela walk out those gates of freedom. We've all seen that footage repeated all over this last week and a half. I think he was just simply that first death of a huge, significant figure within that multimedia era, really. And
I think it's a bit more than that, though. People love the story of the underdog rising up from the dust or the prison cell. We did it with George Washington, we did it with Gandhi. There just is that kind of status you get from transforming from a sort of colonial authoritarian regime into a more democratic and open society. And no doubt television did. certainly lift the profile in the immediate sense of the word, but it's a very romantic story, that, and it's one we all brought up with from childhood, of the underdog somehow coming through and doing well.
He certainly did that. He certainly did. And lived to a ripe old age.
Absolutely.
It's not bad, is it?
But we seem to pick and choose people. Lady Di had a massive effect.
Yeah, she did,
A massive effect,
yes. Or
her achievements,
Kennedy,
or this Kennedy thing. It's just now and again someone comes up and I think it captures the imagination.
Yeah.
Lady Di wasn't I struggled and then became a great person story, was it? It was a fairy prince went wrong story, and then ended in, with a drunk driver. That's all it ended. That's all the story was. But we sort of embraced it, and everywhere. And we were talking about the other day about, you remember where you were when Kennedy died, if you were alive at that point.
Yeah, I remember
but
actually.
You actually remember when Lady Di, when you heard the news about Lady Di. She meant nothing to me, and it really annoys me that I actually remember where I was when somebody told me. And maybe Elvis Presley, and maybe there's one or two significant people, and now Mandela and those types of things.
It's interesting you say
what about
that.
everyone else in between?
Yeah.
We just seem to gloss over them, and it's almost an insult to the other people who achieve things.
I guess you remember because at the time they seemed to be a very important person, and it would reflect the state of shock with which it hit you, no doubt.
Yeah.
Or maybe the time and the context in which it happened, and there's Mickey Savage in New Zealand, coming through the Depression and lifting people's standards of living, and he may not have been the person who should have been credited for getting us out of the Depression. Maybe it should have been Roosevelt's New Deal, but in the New Zealand context, he was the man.
Everybody's always said that it was, didn't they?
Walls, isn't it? There's still a lot of portraits.
The other thing is reignited the debate about whether the Springbok tour changed the apartheid situation, and now people are reviewing that's the question with Keith. About, do you change your mind in retrospect? Well, you can't do that because you made your decision based on the circumstances at the time, and that's how you make your decision. So that was you're either pro tour or anti tour. It doesn't matter. You made your call. But it started that debate about did that one act thing we do 9 years before ultimately add to the thing. My argument's always been that sporting sanctions are a bit of a waste of time, otherwise we wouldn't have Mugabe there and all those other despot leaders still around. It's the economic ones that kill you, no oil, no petrol, no food, no money, much more so, but that's just one opinion. But it started that little debate around the dinner table again about the rights and wrongs of it, which I don't, it's healthy to have those debates and stop that sort of thing happening again, apartheid starting again. But it was interesting that it's had that effect. When it hasn't been sort of the discussion
Hasn't
for
been
some
around for a while.
time, is it?
No, it hasn't been,
people
but
say-
I think both sides of the equation can claim a kind of victory because, the people who were pro-rugby were saying, well, it showed them that we can have multiracial sport in this country and it doesn't lead to civil war. And the people who opposed it said the sanctions did work, and that was the first broadcast of any sporting match going out of South Africa, and it had a huge impact on the population over there. So I think we can look back on it with a degree of satisfaction in terms of New Zealand's role.
Tim, whilst you're talking, and we've got about a minute left, so what to you, what is the most significant thing which has happened this year?
Well, absolutely, without question, the census results. To me, that's the key, whether we're a dying city or a growing city. And for the first time in 30 years, we've had significant growth, 2.7%. And there's a lot more coming out with those census results, where 95% of people in Invercargill are happy with their situation.
Wow.
There's a lot of work that's being done on the social fabric, if you like, or the well-being of the people of our city. Housing isn't at a national level such a big issue. It may be in Christchurch and Auckland, but for most of the country, housing isn't an issue. So there's a lot of interesting information coming out about where we're going and how we feel about life in our country.
Excellent. And on that happy note, it's time to say thank you for being with us on Newsroom this year. We always appreciate you watching. We always appreciate your feedback. Thank you to my panel, Invercargill Mayor Tim Shadbolt, Tom Conroy and Hunter Andrews for making such a great contribution. We wish you a very happy Christmas and a safe New Year, and look out for us again in 2014 because in the words of one actor, we'll be back.